I killed a man to save the monster who owned me. Abigail Hawthorne never imagined those words would define her life. Standing in a blood-soaked cabin during a Wyoming blizzard, a knife trembling in her grip, she understood that survival demanded choices no lady's finishing school ever prepared her for. 3 months earlier, she'd been a desperate daughter in silk gloves. Now she was something else entirely, something the brutal frontier had carved from desperation and lies. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you want to know how an educated woman became a legend in the untamed mountains, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The spring of 1881 arrived in St. Louis with unseasonable cold that matched the chill in the Hawthorne household. Abigail pressed her forehead against the window of their crumbling townhouse, watching ice crystals form at the corners of the glass. Behind her, the sounds of her mother's wet, rattling coughs drifted from the bedroom upstairs. Each cough felt like a countdown. "Abby, you need to help me with these buttons." Catherine Hawthorne stood in the doorway, radiant in her traveling dress of deep burgundy wool. At 27, Catherine possessed the kind of beauty that made people stop mid-sentence. Porcelain skin, golden hair that caught lamplight like spun honey, delicate features that belonged in oil paintings. She was everything their mother had hoped for, everything Abigail was not. Abigail turned from the window. "Your hands work perfectly well. Don't be cruel, not today." Catherine's voice carried a tremor that didn't match her composed expression. "This is already difficult enough." Difficult. The words sat between them like a third person in the room. Abigail crossed the worn carpet and began fastening the tiny pearl buttons running up Catherine's spine. Her own fingers, calloused from years of taking in mending work, scrubbing their floors, pawning whatever remained of value, moved with practiced efficiency. "You don't have to do this," Abigail said quietly. "We'll find another way." "What other way?" Catherine's laugh held no humor. "Mother needs medicine we can't afford. The bank will seize the house in 6 weeks. Father's debts aren't going to pay themselves from beyond the grave." She paused. "Mr. Thornton's arrangement is generous. The contract guarantees. The contract makes you property. The contract makes me a wife. There's a difference." "Is there?" Catherine turned sharply, forcing Abigail to step back. "You think I want this? You think I dreamed of marrying a stranger twice my age and moving to some godforsaken ranch in Wyoming?" Her composure cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "I'm terrified, Abby, but I'm also the only thing standing between mother and the street." Guilt twisted in Abigail's chest. Catherine was right, and they both knew it. Their father, a man who'd loved horse races more than his family, had died 18 months earlier, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. Catherine, beautiful and refined, was their only asset. A frontier rancher named Augustus Thornton had seen her photograph, sent through a matrimonial broker, and offered a small fortune for a cultivated Eastern bride. The money would save them all. "I'm sorry," Abigail whispered. "I just wish." "Wishing won't pay for Mother's laudanum," Catherine's voice softened. "But you can do something for me." She reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "If something happens to me out there, if I need help, I'll write to you. Promise me you'll come." Abigail took the envelope, throat tight. "Catherine, promise me." "I promise." Catherine pulled her into a fierce embrace that smelled of rosewater and fear. When they separated, Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her smile was steady. "The carriage will be here in an hour. I should say goodbye to Mother." Abigail watched her sister climb the stairs with perfect posture, every inch the lady she'd been raised to be. Even walking toward her own sacrifice, Catherine moved like she was gliding into a ballroom. Abigail had never felt more inadequate in her life. The hour passed in a blur of final preparations and hollow reassurances. Their mother, pale and drawn beneath heavy quilts, clutched Catherine's hand and spoke of dignity, duty, and the importance of making a good impression. Catherine nodded at all the right moments, her mask never slipping. Abigail stood in the doorway, watching the performance, feeling like a stranger in her own family. When the carriage finally arrived, Catherine descended the front steps with her chin high and her traveling bags perfectly organized. The driver loaded her trunk while Catherine turned back one final time. "Take care of Mother," she said. "And Abby?" Try not to be so angry at the world. It doesn't suit you." Then she climbed into the carriage, and Abigail watched her sister disappear down the street toward Union Station and a life neither of them could imagine, except Catherine never made it to the train. Abigail found the note 3 hours later, tucked under her pillow where no one else would think to look. "Abby, forgive me. I tried. I truly did, but I can't do this. I can't marry a stranger and pretend it's noble. I can't trade myself for money, no matter how desperately we need it. I'm leaving St. Louis tonight, but not on that westbound train. There's a man, someone I've known for months, someone I actually love. He has nothing, but he's mine, and I'm choosing him over duty. I know what this costs us. I know Mother will suffer. I know you'll hate me, but I would rather live poor and free than die slowly in a gilded cage. Tell Mother I'm sorry. Tell her I'm a coward. She won't be wrong." See, Abigail read the note 3 times, each word hitting like a physical blow. Catherine had run. Catherine, beautiful, dutiful, perfect Catherine, had abandoned them all for some nobody with empty pockets and pretty promises. The money was gone. The contract was void. Their mother would lose everything. Abigail crumpled the note in her fist, rage and panic warring in her chest. Upstairs, her mother coughed again, the sound wet and desperate. In 6 weeks, they'd be on the street. In 6 months, her mother would be dead. Unless. The thought formed slowly, terribly, like frost creeping across glass. The train didn't leave until tomorrow morning. Augustus Thornton had never met Catherine in person, only seen her photograph, only read her letters written by the matrimonial broker. The contract specified a bride from the Hawthorne family, cultivated and educated, arriving on the April 23rd westbound express. It didn't specify which Hawthorne sister. Abigail's hands shook as the impossible plan took shape. She couldn't do it. It was insane. She was nothing like Catherine. Too sharp-tongued, too plain, too rough around the edges from years of survival. She'd be discovered immediately. The rancher would send her back in disgrace, possibly sue them for fraud. But what choice did she have? Let her mother die? Lose their home? Watch everything their family had left crumble into nothing? Abigail stood and walked to Catherine's abandoned room. The wardrobe stood open, revealing traveling dresses Catherine had commissioned specifically for this journey. On the vanity sat the wide-brimmed hat with its heavy black lace veil, designed to protect a lady's complexion from the harsh western sun, or to hide her face entirely. Abigail picked up the veil, her reflection staring back at her from the mirror. Even disguised, she and Catherine looked similar enough. Same dark hair, same general build. If she kept the veil down, spoke little, claimed exhaustion from travel, it might work. It had to work. Abigail spent that night in frantic preparation. She burned Catherine's note in the fireplace, watching the evidence curl into ash. She packed the traveling bags exactly as Catherine would have, adding the modest sum of money Catherine had left behind, probably guilt money, which somehow made it worse. She practiced Catherine's handwriting until her wrist cramped, forging a brief letter to their mother claiming the journey had begun smoothly. She rehearsed Catherine's mannerisms in front of the mirror, the graceful tilt of her head, the soft modulation of her voice, the way she held her hands folded demurely. It all felt like a lie she'd never pull off. But when dawn broke cold and gray over St. Louis, Abigail, dressed in Catherine's burgundy traveling suit, pinned the veiled hat low over her face, and walked out the door carrying her sister's identity like stolen goods. Her mother, sedated with laudanum and barely conscious, murmured what might have been a blessing as Abigail leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Make us proud," her mother whispered. Abigail's throat burned. "I'll try." She took a hired carriage to Union Station, grateful for the early hour that meant fewer crowds. The platform bustled with activity, porters hauling luggage, vendors selling meat pies and coffee, families saying tearful goodbyes. Abigail kept her head down, the veil obscuring most of her face, and presented Catherine's ticket to the conductor. He barely glanced at her. "Track 7, miss. We depart in 20 minutes. 20 minutes until she committed to this madness. 20 minutes to change her mind. Abigail climbed aboard the westbound express and found her assigned compartment, a small private berth that Catherine's contract had paid for in advance. She closed the door, locked it, and collapsed onto the narrow bench seat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was insane. This was fraud. This was the only way to save her mother's life. The train whistle screamed. The locomotive lurched forward, and Abigail Hawthorne, impostor, liar, desperate daughter, rolled west toward a future she hadn't chosen, wearing a dead woman's promises. The journey across the country took 6 days of relentless motion. Abigail kept to her compartment as much as possible, claiming headaches and fatigue whenever the porter knocked. She took meals in her berth, avoided the dining car, and spoke to no one beyond the bare minimum. The veil became her armor and her prison. Through the window, she watched the landscape transform from familiar eastern cities to endless farmland to something altogether wilder. The trees grew sparse. The towns became rough collections of wooden buildings that looked like strong wind might scatter them. The sky opened up into a vast emptiness that made her feel simultaneously free and terrified. She'd never been this far from St. Louis. She'd never been anywhere. On the 4th day, the train stopped in Omaha to take on water. Abigail stood on the platform, stretching her cramped legs, when she overheard 2 ranch hands talking near the luggage car. "Heard Augustus Thornton finally got himself a fancy Eastern bride," one said, spitting tobacco juice onto the tracks. "Some hothouse flower who probably faints at the sight of dirt." The other man laughed. "She'll run screaming within a week. Thornton's place is 3 days from any town, nothing but cattle and wind for miles. If she even makes it there." "You hear what happened?" Abigail froze, pretending to examine her gloves while straining to hear. "Some dispute in Cheyenne. Gambling debts," they said. "Thornton got himself shot 2 days ago, dead before he hit the floor." The words crashed through Abigail like a runaway train. Dead. Augustus Thornton was dead. The contract was void. There was no marriage, no money, no rescue. She'd committed fraud for nothing. Panic clawed at her throat. She should get off the train immediately, turn around, figure out some other solution. But there was no other solution. The money was spent on her mother's medicine, on debts that couldn't wait. If she returned now, she'd return to ruin. The train whistle blew. Abigail stumbled back aboard, her mind racing. Maybe the rancher's estate would honor some portion of the contract. Maybe there was family. Someone who'd take pity on a stranded bride. Maybe, "Tickets, please." The conductor stood in the corridor, checking papers. Abigail fumbled for Catherine's ticket with shaking hands. He examined it, then nodded. "Cheyenne tomorrow morning, miss." "Someone meeting you?" Yes. I believe so." "Good. Wouldn't want you stranded out here alone." He touched his cap and moved on. Stranded. The word echoed in her mind as the train rolled through the deepening dark. She was committed now. Cheyenne tomorrow. Whatever waited there, she'd have to face it. Abigail barely slept that night. The train swayed and clattered, carrying her toward an uncertain fate. She thought of Catherine, safe somewhere with her mystery lover, blissfully unaware of the chaos she'd left behind. She thought of her mother, alone in that cold house, counting on money that would never come. She thought of Augustus Thornton, dead in a gambling dispute, taking their last hope with him. When dawn finally broke, Abigail pressed her face to the window and saw the Wyoming territory spreading out in all directions, a landscape so vast and empty it made her chest ache. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow despite the spring season. Beautiful and brutal. Just after 9 o'clock, the train began to slow. Buildings appeared. Rough wooden structures that formed the frontier town of Cheyenne. It was larger than she'd expected, but still felt raw, unfinished, like someone had carved it from the wilderness, and it might revert at any moment. The train screeched to a stop. Abigail stood on shaking legs, adjusted her veil, and gathered her bags. This was it, the moment of truth. She stepped onto the platform into cold morning air that smelled of coal smoke and something wild she couldn't name. Around her, passengers scattered to waiting families and friends. Abigail stood alone, scanning the crowd for what? Someone from Thornton's estate? A lawyer? No one? "Miss Hawthorne." The voice came from behind her, deep, rough, male. Abigail turned. The man standing 3 feet away was not what she'd expected, not even close. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and lean, in the way of someone who'd earned their strength through hard living rather than leisure. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of dark stubble, a nose that had clearly been broken at least once, a scar cut through his left eyebrow, pulling it into a permanent skeptical arch. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Pale gray, cold as winter sky, assessing her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. He wore rough wool trousers, a worn leather coat, and carried a rifle slung across his back with the casual ease of someone who used it regularly. Everything about him screamed danger. "Miss Catherine Hawthorne?" he repeated when she didn't answer. Abigail's mouth went dry. Yes. Who are you?" "Cole Mercer." He said it like she should know the name. When she didn't react, something that might have been amusement flickered in those cold eyes. "Augustus Thornton owed me money, a lot of it. When he died, his contract with you transferred to me as payment." The world tilted sideways. "I'm sorry, what?" "The marriage contract. You're mine now." He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Let's go." "Wait." Abigail grabbed his arm, then immediately released it when he looked down at her hand like she'd burned him. "I don't understand. Mr. Thornton is dead. The contract is void." "Not according to the territorial judge who settled Thornton's debts." Cole's expression never changed. "Thornton borrowed heavily from me to expand his ranch. Put up everything as collateral, including his mail-order bride contract. When he got himself killed, his creditors got paid. I was first in line." "That's not... You can't just transfer a marriage contract like it's livestock. Out here you can transfer just about anything if the paperwork's right." He started walking toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "You coming voluntarily, or do I need to make this difficult?" Rage and terror warred in Abigail's chest. This was wrong. This was insane. She should scream, run, find the local sheriff. But what would she tell them? That she wasn't really Catherine Hawthorne? That she'd committed fraud and stolen her sister's identity? They'd arrest her, maybe worse, and her mother would still die penniless. Cole Mercer had stopped walking and turned back to look at her, one hand resting on the rifle like it was an extension of his body. His expression held no malice, no cruelty, just a cold, practical assessment of whether she'd be a problem he needed to solve. "You got nowhere else to go," he said flatly. "We both know it. So you can make this hard and end up in my wagon anyway, or you can get in with what's left of your dignity. Your choice." Abigail's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to resist, to refuse to be treated like property. But he was right. She had nowhere to go. No money, no friends in this brutal territory, no way home that didn't end in disaster. She'd traded one trap for another. "Where are we going?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "My cabin, 3 days north into the Wind River Mountains." He threw her trunk into the wagon bed. "Fair warning, it's not the ranch life you signed up for. No servants, no luxuries, no town within 50 miles. Just survival." "And if I refuse?" Cole shrugged. "Then you're stranded in Cheyenne with no money and winter coming. Your choice, but I'd choose quick. We're burning daylight." Abigail looked around the rough frontier town, at the hard-faced men and exhausted women, at the endless empty land stretching in all directions. Everything about this place was brutal, unforgiving, and she was completely, utterly alone. She climbed into the wagon. Cole said nothing, just took the reins and clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, carrying Abigail away from the train station, away from civilization, away from any chance of escape. As Cheyenne disappeared behind them, Abigail finally understood the full scope of her mistake. She'd thought marrying a wealthy rancher would be hard. She'd thought living in a remote territory would be difficult. She'd had no idea. The man beside her, this scarred, dangerous stranger who owned her through legal manipulation, didn't speak for the first hour. Just drove the wagon north toward mountains that looked like teeth against the sky. Finally, unable to bear the silence, Abigail broke it. "How long is this contract binding?" "As binding as any marriage, till death." Cole didn't look at her. "Though out here, death comes quicker than most places." "That's supposed to comfort me?" "No, it's supposed to be the truth." He finally glanced over. "You planning to keep that veil on the whole time? Makes you look like you're in mourning." "Maybe I am." "For Thornton? You never met him." "For my life, for any choice I might have had." Cole actually laughed at that, a short, bitter sound. You ever had a choice, princess? Seems to me you were sold off whether you liked it or not. At least now you know exactly where you stand. The casual cruelty of it stung worse than outright anger would have. Abigail pulled the veil back, tired of hiding, too angry to care anymore. Cole looked at her face fully for the first time. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or reassessment. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Good. I hate meeting expectations." Abigail met his eyes without flinching. "And for the record, Mr. Mercer, I'm not your property. I'm not anyone's property. This contract might give you legal ownership, but it doesn't make me yours. We'll see how long that pride lasts when winter hits." But there was something almost like respect in his voice now. Most hothouse flowers wilt by October. "Then I guess you'll be surprised twice." They drove in silence after that, but it felt different now. Less like captor and prisoner, more like two people trapped in the same bad situation, assessing whether the other would make it worse. The landscape grew wilder with each mile. Trees thickened into dense forests. The road, barely more than wagon ruts, climbed steadily upward. By the time the sun began to set, they'd left civilization so far behind that Abigail could no longer see any sign of human habitation. Just endless wilderness and the cold, indifferent sky. Cole stopped the wagon near a small clearing beside a creek. "We'll camp here tonight. 2 more days to the cabin." He set about making camp with practiced efficiency, unhitching the horses, building a fire, unpacking supplies. Abigail watched, feeling useless and out of place. "I can help," she offered. "You know how to hobble a horse?" "No." "Start a fire without matches?" "No." "Gut a rabbit?" "Absolutely not." Cole looked at her like she'd confirmed his worst suspicions. "Then stay out of the way." Abigail bit back a sharp retort and sat on a fallen log, watching him work. Everything he did spoke of hard-won competence, the kind that came from years of survival in unforgiving conditions. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. He'd lived out here a long time, long enough that civilization probably felt foreign to him now. When the fire finally caught, Cole produced coffee and jerky from his supplies. He handed her both without comment, then sat across the fire, eating in silence. "Why did Thornton owe you money?" Abigail asked. "Cattle venture. He wanted to expand, needed capital. I had it." Cole poked the fire with a stick. "Fool got greedy, started gambling to make quick money. Made enemies instead. Did you know he was getting a mail-order bride? Knew about the contract. Didn't care much either way." He looked up at her. "Still don't, if I'm honest. I needed to collect what I was owed. You were part of that debt, that's all. I'm not currency. Out here, everything's currency. Labor, skills, connections, pretty faces." His gaze was clinical, not leering. Thornton thought a refined Eastern wife would give him status. "I got no use for status, but I do need someone who can handle the cabin when I'm running trap lines. That's what you are now. Labor." The bluntness of it should have been insulting. Instead, Abigail found it almost refreshing after years of polite lies and social games. "What happens if I can't handle it?" Cole shrugged. "Then you'll learn or you'll leave. Mountain doesn't care either way." "And you? Do you care?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Ask me again in 6 months." They finished eating in silence. When full dark fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. Abigail wrapped her traveling cloak tighter, teeth chattering. Cole tossed her a heavy wool blanket without comment. "Sleep near the fire. Watch for sparks." He settled on the opposite side of the flames, rifle within arm's reach, and closed his eyes. Abigail lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of wilderness, wind in the trees, the creek's constant murmur, something howling in the far distance. The stars overhead were brighter and more numerous than any she'd ever seen in St. Louis. Beautiful and terrifying, just like everything else out here. They broke camp before dawn and continued north. The second day passed much like the first. Long hours of rough travel, few words exchanged, Cole's cold efficiency versus Abigail's growing exhaustion. By the third day, Abigail's body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. Her hands were blistered from gripping the wagon bench. Her back screamed from the constant jostling. Her face was windburned despite the veil. But she didn't complain. Wouldn't give Cole Mercer the satisfaction. Late afternoon on the third day, they climbed a final ridge, and Cole pulled the wagon to a stop. There. Abigail looked where he pointed and saw it, a log cabin nestled in a small valley, surrounded by towering pines and rocky outcrops. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant someone had been there recently. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, but still rough, functional, rather than comfortable. "That's home," Cole said. "Such as it is." He drove the wagon down the slope toward the cabin. As they got closer, Abigail could see more details. A small barn for the horses, a shed for supplies, a creek running behind the property. It was isolated, brutal in its simplicity, and it would be her prison for the foreseeable future. Cole stopped the wagon in front of the cabin and jumped down. "Come on, I'll show you around." The interior was as sparse as she'd feared. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a few chairs. A ladder led to a sleeping loft. Everything was clean but worn, built for function over comfort. "Root cellars outside, barn's got the horses and some chickens," Cole said. "Creek water's clean, privy's behind the cabin." He pointed to the loft. "That's your space, I sleep down here." "How considerate." He ignored the sarcasm. "There's rules if you're staying. You pull your weight, cooking, cleaning, preserving food, tending the chickens. I hunt and trap, handle the heavy work. We split everything else. And if I refuse, then you leave. But there's 50 miles of wilderness between here and the nearest town, and I wouldn't recommend making that trip alone." His expression hardened. "I'm not your husband, princess. I'm not your protector. I'm the man who got stuck with you as payment for a debt. You survive here or you don't. That's on you." It was the most he'd said in 3 days, and every word landed like a hammer blow. But instead of crumbling, Abigail felt something unexpected rise in her chest. Not fear, not despair. Anger, pure white-hot fury at every man who'd ever treated her like property. Her father, Augustus Thornton, and now this scarred mountain man who thought she'd fold under pressure. "Fine," she said coldly. "Show me where you keep the axe. If I'm going to survive, I might as well start now." Cole's eyebrows rose slightly. Then he almost smiled. "Woodpile's out back. Try not to cut off any toes." That first night in the cabin, Abigail lay in the loft listening to Cole's steady breathing below and realized something fundamental had shifted. She'd left St. Louis as a fraud wearing her sister's identity, desperate and terrified. But somewhere during that brutal 3-day journey, pretending to be Catherine had become impossible. The veil was gone. The performance was over. She was just Abigail now, angry, stubborn, completely out of her depth. And somehow, that felt more honest than anything she'd been in years. Tomorrow, she'd start learning how to survive, how to chop wood without killing herself, how to cook over an open fire, how to live in this brutal, unforgiving place. Not because she wanted to, because she refused to let it break her. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, carrying the promise of challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But Abigail Hawthorne had stopped running. Now she'd fight. The axe came down wrong on the first swing, glanced off the log, and nearly took Abigail's shin with it. "Christ!" She jumped back, heart hammering. From the barn doorway, Cole looked up from the harness he was mending. He watched her for a long moment, expression unreadable, then went back to his work without saying a word. Abigail gripped the axe handle tighter, her palms already burning where blisters were forming. The woodpile loomed before her like a challenge she couldn't back down from. She positioned another log on the chopping block, raised the axe, her arms shaking from the weight, and swung again. This time the blade bit into the wood but didn't split it. The axe stuck there, wedged in the grain, and no amount of pulling would free it. "You're choking up too much on the handle." Cole's voice came from directly behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. Abigail spun around, which was a mistake because the sudden movement sent pain shooting through her lower back. "I'm doing fine," she said through gritted teeth. "You're doing terrible." He reached past her and yanked the axe free with one smooth motion. "Hold it here." He indicated a spot lower on the handle. "Let the weight do the work. You're trying to muscle it." "Maybe I like doing things the hard way." "Then you'll be dead by winter." He handed the axe back to her. "Swing from your hips, not your shoulders. And for the love of, aim where you want the blade to go, not where you're afraid it'll land." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with the woodpile and her wounded pride. Abigail adjusted her grip the way he'd shown shown her, positioned the log, took a breath, swung from her hips. The wood split clean down the middle. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. By the time the sun reached its peak, she'd split maybe a tenth of what needed splitting, and her entire body screamed in protest. Blisters had burst and reformed on both palms. Her shoulders felt like they'd been beaten with rocks. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead despite the cold air. Cole emerged from the barn leading both horses. "I'm checking the north trap line. Be back before dark." "You're leaving?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "That a problem?" "Yes," Abigail wanted to say. "I've been here less than a day and I don't know where anything is or how anything works, and the isolation is already suffocating." Instead, she said, "No, I'll be fine." Cole swung into the saddle with easy grace. "There's dried venison in the root cellar, beans in the jar by the fireplace. Don't burn the cabin down." Then he was gone, disappearing into the tree line, leaving her utterly alone. The silence pressed in from all sides. No city sounds, no voices, no familiar rhythms of civilization, just winged through the pines and the distant cry of something that might have been an eagle. Abigail stood in the clearing, surrounded by mountains and trees and sky, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Then she picked up the axe and went back to work. The days that followed blurred into a brutal routine. Cole left most mornings to run his trap lines, whatever that meant, and returned before nightfall with whatever he'd caught. Abigail tried to make herself useful and failed spectacularly at almost everything. The chickens terrified her. They were mean-spirited creatures that pecked at her hands when she tried to collect eggs, and one particularly aggressive rooster seemed to view her as a personal enemy. She'd emerge from the coop with scratches on her arms, and maybe 3 eggs if she was lucky. "They can smell fear," Cole said one evening, watching her latest battle with the rooster. "They can smell a lot of things. Fear's probably the least of it." Abigail shoved past him, cradling 4 hard-won eggs against her chest like treasure. Cooking over the fireplace was its own nightmare. Everything either burned to charcoal or stayed raw in the middle. The first time she tried to make cornbread, it came out so hard Cole suggested using it as ammunition. "For what?" Abigail demanded. "Bear attacks, maybe. Hit him right, this'd take out an eye." She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it without looking, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. But slowly, painfully, things improved. The calluses on her hands thickened until the axe handle stopped tearing her skin. Her aim got better. She learned to split wood in a rhythm that didn't leave her gasping. The pile began to grow. 2 weeks in, Cole came back from the trap line with 3 rabbits and a nasty gash across his forearm. "What happened?" Abigail asked as he dropped the rabbits on the work table. "Caught my arm on a snare. It's nothing." Blood soaked through his shirt sleeve. "That's not nothing. Sit down." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through your shirt. Sit down." To her surprise, he did. Maybe because he was actually hurt, or maybe because arguing took more energy than compliance. Abigail fetched water and clean cloth, trying to remember anything useful from the handful of times she'd helped her mother tend to minor injuries back home. She peeled back his sleeve carefully. The cut was deep but clean, running from his wrist halfway to his elbow. It needed stitches she didn't know how to give. "There's a needle and thread in the kit under the bed," Cole said, reading her thoughts. "You ever sew up skin before?" "I've mended plenty of clothing. Same principle. Just don't pull too tight or you'll pucker it." Abigail's hands shook as she threaded the needle. This was completely different from mending a torn hem. This was flesh and blood, and the very real possibility of making things worse. "You want whiskey first?" she asked. "You offering to share?" "I meant for the pain." "I know what you meant." Cole held his arm steady. "Just get it done." The first stitch made her stomach turn. The needle resisted going through skin in a way fabric never did. Cole didn't flinch, but she saw his jaw tighten, watched the muscles in his neck go rigid. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize. Just finish it." She did 7 stitches total, each one getting marginally less terrible than the last. By the end, her hands had stopped shaking. Cole's arm looked like a battlefield, but the wound was closed. "Not bad," he said, examining her work. "Might not even scar too ugly." "You say that like you're keeping count." He pulled his sleeve back down. "Out here, scars are just proof you survived something. Nothing to be ashamed of." That night, Abigail lay in the loft and thought about scars. The ones you could see and the ones you couldn't. She wondered what scars Cole carried beneath that stoic exterior. What had driven him to live alone in these mountains, so far from anything resembling society? She wondered what scars she'd carry by the time this was over. 3 weeks became 4. 4 became 6. Spring deepened into something that almost resembled summer, though the nights stayed cold enough that Abigail learned to sleep in layers. She learned other things too. How to tell when the bread dough had risen enough. How to preserve meat with salt before it spoiled. How to patch her own clothes when they tore on branches or nails. How to read the sky for coming weather, the particular quality of clouds that meant rain, the smell in the air before a storm. Cole taught her some of it through terse instructions. The rest she figured out through trial and error, usually error. "You're not completely hopeless," he said one evening as she served up a stew that didn't taste like boiled leather. High praise from the man who compared my first cornbread to weapons-grade ammunition. That wasn't a comparison, that was a fact. But he ate 2 bowls of the stew, which said more than his words ever could. They fell into a strange partnership built on necessity rather than affection. Cole handled the hunting, trapping, and heavy labor. Abigail managed the cabin, the chickens, the cooking. They worked around each other like water flowing around rocks, not quite together, but not quite separate either. He still disappeared for days at a time, checking distant trap lines or hunting in the high country. Abigail stopped asking where he went. He always came back, and that was enough. The isolation should have broken her. Some days it nearly did. She'd stand in the clearing with an armful of firewood and feel the silence pressing down like a physical weight. The mountains surrounded her on all sides, beautiful and imprisoning in equal measure. But she didn't break. Maybe because breaking would have meant admitting Cole was right about her. Maybe because she was too stubborn to give him the satisfaction. Maybe because somewhere in the endless cycle of chopping wood and fighting chickens and learning to survive, she'd found something she'd never had in St. Louis. Purpose. Not the decorative, pointless purpose of being a lady in a dying household. Real purpose. The kind where if she didn't complete her tasks, there were actual consequences. The fire went out. They went hungry. The cabin fell apart. It was brutal and exhausting, and she resented it most days. But it was honest. 2 months in, a summer storm rolled through the valley with shocking violence. Thunder shook the cabin walls. Lightning turned the world white. Rain hammered the roof so hard Abigail couldn't hear herself think. She was alone. Cole had left that morning for the high country trap lines and wasn't due back until tomorrow. The storm had come up fast, giving no warning. Water started dripping through a crack in the roof, right above the table. Abigail grabbed a pot to catch it, but the drip quickly became a stream. She needed to patch it from outside, but the storm was too dangerous. Then a section of the roof over the loft sagged inward with an ominous creak. No, no, no! Abigail climbed the ladder to investigate. Water poured through a gap where the logs had separated, soaking everything. Her bedding, her few possessions, everything was getting destroyed. She needed something to block the gap. Anything. She found an old canvas tarp in the storage area and tried to wedge it into the opening from inside, but the wind kept tearing it away. The only way to fix this was to get on the roof in a lightning storm. This was insane. This was how people died. But if she didn't fix it, the roof would collapse, and Cole would return to find her crushed under wet timber or hypothermic from exposure. Abigail grabbed the tarp, a hammer, and nails. She climbed out through the loft opening onto the slick, rain-soaked roof, immediately regretting every decision that had led to this moment. The wind tried to tear her off the cabin. Rain lashed her face, blinding her. Lightning split the sky close enough that she felt the hair on her arms stand up. She crawled to the damaged section and tried to secure the tarp, but her hands were too wet, too cold. The nails kept slipping. The hammer was slick with rain. Another crack of thunder, so loud it felt like the mountain itself splitting open. Abigail drove the nail home with shaking hands, then another. Her whole body trembled from cold and fear and adrenaline, but she kept going until the tarp was secured over the gap. It wasn't perfect. Water still seeped through in places, but it would hold until morning. She crawled back to the loft opening and dropped inside, landing in a shaking heap on the floor. Her clothes were soaked through. Her hands were bleeding from where she'd smashed her fingers with the hammer in the dark. She couldn't feel her feet. But the roof was patched. She'd done it herself. Abigail stripped off her wet clothes with numb fingers, wrapped herself in the one dry blanket she could find, and huddled by the fireplace until her shaking subsided. Cole found her there the next morning, still wrapped in the blanket, the cabin floor littered with evidence of the previous night's battle. He took in the scene without comment, the pots catching water, the soaked loft, Abigail's bandaged hands. "Storm hit hard," he said finally. "The roof started caving in. I patched it." Cole climbed the ladder to inspect her work. He stayed up there for a long time. When he came back down, his expression was unreadable. "Job's sloppy," he said. Abigail's temper flared. "Well, excuse me for not doing perfect carpentry in the middle of a lightning storm, but it'll hold until I can fix it proper." He looked at her directly for the first time. "You went on the roof? In that storm? What was I supposed to do? Let the cabin flood? You could have died. I could die doing laundry if I trip wrong. Everything out here wants to kill me." She pulled the blanket tighter. "At least this way I fought back." Something shifted in Cole's face, surprise maybe, or reassessment. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again. Finally, he just nodded and went to stoke the fire. They spent the day making proper repairs. Cole on the roof with new lumber, Abigail passing him tools and materials from below. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from shared effort rather than forced companionship. That evening, he taught her how to clean and maintain the rifles. "You should know how these work," he said, showing her how to load, aim, fire. "Case something comes around when I'm gone." "What kind of something?" "Bears, wolves, men, sometimes." He handed her the smaller rifle. "Out here, you protect yourself or you don't survive. No one's coming to save you." Abigail held the rifle, feeling its weight, understanding what he wasn't saying. This wasn't just practical instruction. This was trust, in his own rough way. He was teaching her to survive without him. "I won't let you down," she said quietly. Cole looked at her for a long moment. "I know." The next weeks fell into a deeper rhythm. They worked together more often now, Cole teaching her to track game, to read animal signs, to move through the forest without making noise. She was terrible at it initially, crashing through underbrush like a drunk bull, but she improved. One afternoon he brought down a deer and showed her how to dress it properly, explaining which cuts were good for what, how to use every part of the animal, waste nothing. It was bloody, messy work that made her stomach turn, but she pushed through it. "Why'd you come out here?" she asked as they worked. "To the mountains, I mean, instead of staying in civilization." Cole was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Got back from the war and nothing fit anymore. Couldn't stand the noise, the crowds, people talking just to hear themselves." He made a precise cut along the deer's spine. "Out here, everything's honest. The mountain doesn't lie to you, doesn't pretend to be something it's not." "You were in the war?" Most men my age were, one side or the other. He didn't elaborate on which side. "You learn things in a war, things you can't unlearn. Figured the mountain was the only place that wouldn't care what I'd done." Abigail thought about her own secrets, the lies she'd told, the identities she'd stolen, the fraud she'd committed. Sometimes running makes sense. This isn't running, it's choosing different battles. He met her eyes. "You understand that better than most, I'd guess." She held his gaze, wondering what he saw when he looked at her. Did he suspect she wasn't who she claimed to be? Or did he simply not care? "What gave me away?" she asked carefully. "You're nothing like what a fancy mail-order bride should be. Wrong accent, wrong manners, wrong everything." He went back to his work. "But you work hard and you don't quit. That counts for more than breeding. You're not going to ask?" "Ask what?" "Your real name, your real story?" Cole shrugged. "Everyone out here is running from something. Your reasons are your business." Relief washed through her, sharp and unexpected. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Winter's coming, that's when the mountain really tests you." As if to punctuate his words, the first frost arrived 3 days later. Abigail woke to find ice crystals coating the inside of the windows, her breath visible in the loft. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight. "We need to finish preserving food," Cole said at breakfast, "and I need to teach you to shoot proper." They spent the following weeks in intense preparation, smoking meat, drying vegetables, storing everything they could in the root cellar. Cole hunted with focused urgency, bringing back elk and deer and anything else he could find. Abigail practiced with the rifle until her shoulder was bruised from the recoil. Her aim improved from terrible to merely bad, but Cole insisted she keep practicing. "Hit that tree," he said, pointing to a pine 30 yards away. She missed by 3 feet. Again, she missed by 2 feet. Again. This time the bullet struck bark. Not center mass, but close enough. "Better. Now do it 50 more times until you can hit it without thinking." Her arms ached. Her ears rang from the gunfire, but she did it over and over until hitting the tree became almost automatic. "Why are you pushing so hard?" she finally asked. Cole loaded his own rifle, fired, hit a tree twice as far away dead center. "Because when winter really settles in, I might be gone for a week at a time. You'll be alone here. And if something comes, animal or otherwise, you need to be able to handle it." The thought of being alone in the cabin for a full week made her chest tight, but she nodded and raised the rifle again. That night, after a dinner of venison stew and the bread she'd finally mastered, Cole pulled out a worn deck of cards. "You play poker?" Abigail blinked. In 2 months, they'd never done anything resembling leisure activity. "A little. My father used to—" She stopped herself. "Used to what?" "Nothing. Yes, I know poker." They played several hands. Cole won the first 3 easily, reading her tells like they were written on her forehead. But Abigail learned fast, started controlling her expressions, bluffing with more confidence. She won the 4th hand with a straight that came out of nowhere. Cole raised an eyebrow. "Maybe your father taught you better than you let on." "My father taught me lots of things, most of them useless." She gathered the cards for the next deal. "But he was good at cards, and horses, and losing everything we had." "That why you're here? He gambled the family money away?" "Among other things." Abigail dealt the next hand. "He died before he could fix any of it, left my mother with debts and no way to pay them." "So you sold yourself to a stranger to save her?" The words should have stung. Instead, they just felt true. "Something like that." Cole studied his cards. "That takes guts. Stupid, maybe, but guts. Coming from a man who lives alone on a mountain, I'll take that as a compliment." He almost smiled. "You should." They played cards until the fire burned low and Abigail's eyes started to droop. When she finally climbed to the loft, Cole called up to her. "You did good today, with the rifle." It was maybe the kindest thing he'd ever said to her. Abigail's throat went tight. "Thank you." "Don't let it go to your head. You're still a terrible shot." She threw her boot down at him. He caught it and set it by the fire to dry, shaking his head. But she heard him laughing quietly as she settled into bed. The easy moment didn't last. 2 days later, Cole left before dawn for the high country, saying he'd be back in 4 days. Abigail stood in the doorway watching him disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, fighting the urge to call him back. She was fine. She'd been alone before. She could handle 4 days. The first day went smoothly. She followed her routine: chickens, wood, cooking, maintenance. The isolation pressed in, but she pushed back against it. The second day, the wind picked up, howling through the valley like something alive and angry. The temperature dropped again. Abigail burned through firewood faster than expected, staying close to the fireplace. The third day, she heard something moving around outside the cabin after dark. At first, she thought it was her imagination, just the wind. Then she heard it again, something heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin. Footsteps in the dirt, snuffling at the door. Abigail grabbed the rifle with shaking hands, checked that it was loaded the way Cole had taught her. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. The sound came again, closer. Something scratched at the cabin wall. She moved to the window, rifle raised, trying to see into the darkness. The moon was barely a sliver, offering almost no light. Then she saw it. A bear. Massive, dark, maybe 8 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs to sniff at the shuttered window. It was after the smell of food from inside the cabin, the preserved meat, the fresh bread, anything edible. Abigail backed away from the window, rifle pointed at the door, praying the bear would lose interest and leave. Instead, it started pushing against the door, testing it. The wooden bar across the frame groaned but held. The bear pushed harder. Abigail's hands shook so badly she could barely keep the rifle steady. She couldn't shoot through the door. The wood was too thick, and she'd more likely just anger it. But if that bar broke, if the bear got inside, she did the only thing she could think of. She started making noise, yelling, banging pots together, creating as much chaos as possible. "Get out! Go, leave!" The bear paused, sniffed again. Abigail grabbed a pan and threw it at the door, the clang echoing through the cabin. "I said get out!" For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the bear dropped to all fours and lumbered away, crashing through the underbrush until the sound faded into silence. Abigail stood frozen, rifle still raised, listening for any sign it was coming back. Her whole body shook. Tears streamed down her face from fear and adrenaline, but the bear was gone. She'd survived. She didn't sleep that night. Just sat by the fire with the rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound, waiting for dawn. When Cole finally returned the next afternoon, he found her exhausted, hollow-eyed, but still standing. She told him about the bear in clipped sentences, trying to keep her voice steady. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he checked the door frame, the scratches on the wall, the tracks outside. "You handled it right," he said finally, "making noise. Bears usually back off if you make yourself seem dangerous." "Usually?" "Nothing's guaranteed out here." He looked at her directly. "But you didn't panic, didn't do anything stupid. That's what matters." Abigail wanted to collapse with relief, wanted to admit how terrified she'd been, how close she'd come to breaking. But she just nodded and said, "It won't get the better of me next time." "No," Cole agreed, something like respect in his voice. "I don't think it will." That evening, he didn't leave her side. Made dinner himself, dealt cards without asking if she wanted to play. Small gestures that said more than words could. And for the first time since arriving in these mountains, Abigail didn't feel quite so alone. October came to the mountains with teeth. The first real snow arrived overnight, transforming the valley into something from a fever dream. Abigail woke to find everything buried under 8 inches of white, the world muffled and strange. The chickens refused to leave their coop. The creek ran slower, ice forming at its edges. Cole had been right. Winter was different out here. "This is nothing," he said when she mentioned the snow at breakfast. "Wait till January. We'll get storms that bury the cabin to the windows." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to make you prepared." He pulled on his heavy coat, the one lined with fur that made him look even more massive. "I need to check the far trap lines before the passes close. Week, maybe 10 days. Abigail's stomach dropped. 10 days? Could be less if the weather holds. Could be more if it doesn't. He shouldered his pack, checked his rifle. "You know what to do. Keep the fire going, ration the food. Don't do anything stupid." Define stupid. "Anything that might get you killed." He paused at the door. "You'll be fine. You handled the bear." Then he was gone, swallowed by the white landscape, leaving Abigail alone with the silence and the cold. The first 3 days passed in anxious routine. She kept the fire fed, the cabin warm, shot a rabbit that wandered too close. Her aim was getting better, even if it took 3 tries. The small victory felt hollow in the vast emptiness. On the 4th day, she heard riders approaching. The sound carried strangely through the snow, muffled hoofbeats, the jingle of tack, low voices. Abigail's heart kicked into a gallop. Cole wouldn't be back yet. No one came out this far without reason, and people who came this far into the wilderness rarely brought good intentions. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. 3 men on horseback emerged from the tree line, moving slowly through the snow. They wore rough clothes, heavy coats. All of them were armed. The lead rider was tall and lean, with a face like weathered leather and cold eyes that swept over the cabin with calculating interest. He raised a hand, signaling the others to stop 20 yards from the door. "Anyone home?" he called out, his voice carrying an accent Abigail couldn't place. Southern, maybe, or just old. She stayed silent, barely breathing, rifle trained on the door. "We saw smoke from your chimney," the man continued, dismounting with practiced ease. "Been riding 2 days through this snow, just looking for shelter, maybe some hot food." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No need for trouble." The other 2 men climbed down as well, spreading out slightly. Flanking positions. Abigail's grip tightened on the rifle. "My husband's inside," she called through the door, pitching her voice loud and steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "He doesn't take kindly to strangers." "That right?" The lead man walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. "Funny, we've been watching this place for a bit. Only saw one set of tracks leading out a few days back. None coming back. Her blood turned to ice. You're alone out here, miss. We both know it. He stopped at the base of the porch steps. Now we can do this easy or we can do this hard. But either way, we're coming inside. Too cold to keep arguing through a door. Stay back or I'll shoot. With what? That old rifle you probably don't even know how to load? He laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. Come on now, we're not going to hurt you. Just want to warm up, get some food, then we'll be on our way. Abigail's mind raced. 3 armed men. She had 1 rifle with 6 shots. Even if she was a perfect marksman, which she absolutely wasn't, those were terrible odds. But letting them inside was suicide. I'm counting to 3, she said, her voice harder now. Then I start shooting through this door. Don't care if I hit you or not. The noise will carry, and my husband will hear it. Your husband's 3 days gone, checking trap lines. We talked to a trapper down in the valley. He mentioned Cole Mercer, the crazy bastard who lives up here alone. The man's smile widened. Except he's not alone this year, is he? Got himself a pretty Eastern bride, one who came with a dowry. Abigail's stomach lurched. This wasn't random. They'd come here specifically, hunting for money they thought she'd brought. There's no dowry, she said. That contract was paid off months ago. See, I don't believe that. Augustus Thornton was known for his arrangements, always kept cash on hand, and when he died, that money went somewhere. The man took another step closer. We figure Mercer took it, and we figure you know where it is. You figured wrong. Then I guess we'll just have to search the place ourselves. He moved toward the porch. Abigail didn't think, just acted. She fired through the door, aiming low, hoping to hit nothing but hoping even more to prove she meant business. The gunshot shattered the frozen silence. The bullet punched through the door and buried itself in the snow 3 feet from the lead man's boots. He stopped, surprise flickering across his weathered face. Then his expression hardened into something uglier. All right then. Hard way it is. He nodded to the other 2 men. They moved simultaneously, one toward the side of the cabin, the other toward the back, looking for another way in. Abigail's mind went white with panic. She couldn't cover all the entrances. The moment they breached, she was done. She fired another shot through the door, this one closer to the lead man. He dove sideways, cursing. The sound bought her maybe 10 seconds. She ran to the back wall just as something heavy slammed against the rear window shutter. Wood cracked. The shutter held but wouldn't for long. Front or back? She couldn't defend both. She chose the front, racing back to the door as the lead man hit it with his shoulder. The bar across the frame groaned, wood splintering at the hinges. Another hit. The bar cracked down the middle. Abigail braced the rifle against her shoulder, aimed at the door, and prayed her hands would stop shaking long enough to shoot straight. The door exploded inward on the 3rd hit. The lead man stumbled through, hand going for his revolver. Abigail fired, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. The shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall behind him, but it was close enough to make him duck. Put it down, he snarled, his own gun now drawn and pointed at her chest. Next one goes through your... The rear window shattered. One of the other men crashed through, boots hitting the floor in an explosion of broken glass and snow. He grabbed Abigail from behind, wrenching the rifle from her hands. She drove her elbow back into his ribs, hard. He grunted, grip loosening. She twisted, broke free, scrambled for the knife block on the table. Her hand closed around a handle just as the lead man grabbed her arm, spinning her around. His fingers dug into her wrist until the bones ground together. Enough, he growled, squeezing until her hand spasmed and the knife clattered to the floor. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The 3rd man entered through the front door, brushing snow from his coat. All 3 of them now inside, surrounding her. The cabin suddenly felt impossibly small. Tear this place apart, the lead man ordered, still gripping Abigail's wrist. Money's here somewhere. Check the floors, the walls, everything. There's no money, Abigail said through gritted teeth. I came here with nothing. Thornton was already dead. There was no dowry. Then what are you doing out here? Playing house with the mountain man for fun? He shoved her into a chair, his revolver never wavering. Sit. Move and I'll put a hole in you just big enough to make you regret it. The other 2 men began destroying the cabin. They flipped the table, dumped drawers, ripped open storage containers. Everything Abigail and Cole had carefully organized was torn apart in minutes. One man climbed to the loft, throwing down her belongings. The other began prying up floorboards with a knife, searching for hidden compartments. "Nothing up here," the one in the loft called down. "Keep looking." They worked with brutal efficiency, years of practice clear in their movements. These weren't desperate amateurs, they were professionals. Men who'd done this before, which made them infinitely more dangerous. The lead man kept his gun trained on Abigail while his associates worked. His eyes were cold, calculating, taking in every detail of her face. "You're not what I expected," he said conversationally. "Thought Thornton's bride would be soft. Pampered. You got scars on your hands, calluses. You've been working." Abigail said nothing. "What's your name?" "Your real name, not whatever you told Mercer." "Does it matter?" "Suppose not. You'll be dead soon either way if you don't cooperate." He tilted his head, studying her. "Unless you want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "You tell us where Mercer keeps his valuables, furs, cash, anything worth taking. We tie you up gentle, make it look good for when he gets back. You tell him you fought hard, didn't tell us nothing. Everyone lives." "And if I don't?" "Then we burn this cabin down with you in it, wait for Mercer to come back, and make him watch while it falls apart." His smile was all teeth. "Winter's long, mountains lonely, lots of ways for people to die out here." Before Abigail could respond, the man searching the floor let out a triumphant sound. "Got something." He pried up a loose board near the fireplace, revealing a small hollow space beneath. Inside was a leather pouch, heavy with something that clinked when he pulled it out. "Well now." The lead man grabbed the pouch, opened it. Gold coins spilled into his palm, maybe 20 of them. "Look at that. And you said there was no money." "That's not mine. That's Cole's from his trapping. Don't much care whose it is. It's ours now." He pocketed the coins, then gestured to the man in the loft. "Anything else?" "Some furs, good quality, worth maybe $50. "Take them." They were ransacking everything Cole had worked for, everything they'd built together. Rage burned through Abigail's fear, hot and consuming. "He'll kill you for this," she said quietly. "When he comes back, he'll hunt you down." The lead man laughed. "Mercer? That hermit's been half feral for years. He won't leave these mountains, too scared of civilization from what I hear." He moved closer, his gun now inches from Abigail's face. "Besides, who says we're letting you live to tell him?" The other men had stopped searching, gathering their stolen goods near the door. One of them shot their leader a questioning look. "Boss? What about her?" The lead man considered this, his expression unreadable. "Can't leave her talking, but can't kill her quick either. Mercer might track us if he finds her body." "So what, we take her with us?" "No, too much trouble." He grabbed Abigail's arm, hauled her to her feet. "We tie her up outside, far enough from the cabin that she can't get loose quick, close enough that Mercer will find her eventually. If she freezes before then, well, that's the mountains doing, not ours." Terror flooded Abigail's veins. Being left outside in the snow, bound and helpless, was a slow, agonizing death sentence. Hours of freezing cold before hypothermia took her. She had to do something. Now. Her hand was still under her skirt where she'd hidden the small hunting knife earlier. A habit Cole had drilled into her after the bear incident. Always keep a weapon close. The men had taken her rifle, hadn't thought to search more carefully. "Move!" The lead man shoved her toward the door. Abigail stumbled, her hand closing around the knife handle beneath her skirt. It was small, barely 6 inches, but it was sharp. Cole had taught her to keep it that way. The man behind her grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around to bind her wrists. The moment his hands left his gun, Abigail moved. She yanked the knife free and drove it up into his thigh, angling for the meat of the muscle. Not a killing blow, she didn't have the strength or angle for that, but enough to hurt. The man screamed, stumbling backward. His leg buckled beneath him. The lead man swung his revolver toward her. "You little—" The front door exploded open. Cole Mercer came through it like a force of nature, snow still clinging to his coat, rifle already raised. He didn't say a word, just fired. The shot took the lead man in the shoulder, spinning him around. His revolver clattered to the floor. The third man, the one from the loft, drew his own gun. Cole was faster. The second shot hit him center mass. He went down hard, didn't move again. The man Abigail had stabbed was trying to crawl toward his weapon, blood streaming from his leg. Cole stepped over him, kicked the gun away, then brought the rifle butt down hard against the back of his head. The man went limp. Silence crashed over the cabin like a wave. Cole stood in the center of the destruction, breathing hard, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Abigail. She was still holding the knife, still shaking, blood on her hands that might have been hers or the man's or both. "You hurt?" Cole's voice was rough, strained. Abigail shook her head, not trusting her voice. Cole moved to the lead man, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing in a steady stream. Cole grabbed him by the collar, hauled him up with one hand. "Who sent you?" "Go to hell." Cole slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent us. We heard about Thornton's bride, figured there was money. That's all." "You're lying." Cole's grip tightened. "You knew about the trap lines. Knew when I'd be gone. Someone told you." The man spat blood. "Fine. Some trapper in the valley. Said you had a woman up here. Said she came for money. We took a chance." Cole held him for another moment, his expression carved from stone. Then he dropped him and turned to Abigail. "Get your coat. We need to tie these two up before they come around." Abigail's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to move. Together they bound the unconscious man and the injured lead man with rope from the supply shed. Cole worked with cold efficiency, his hand steady despite the violence of moments before. The third man, the one Cole had shot, was dead. Abigail tried not to look at him, but her eyes kept drifting back to the body. She'd never seen a dead person before. Not like this. "Stop looking," Cole said quietly. "Won't help." "You killed him." "He would have killed you." Cole finished tying off the last knot, then stood. "You going to be sick?" "I don't know." "If you are, do it outside. I don't want the mess in here." The casual cruelty of it should have shocked her. Instead, it just felt honest, practical. This was survival, not a drawing room. There was no space for delicate sensibilities. Abigail went to the door, gulped cold air until her stomach settled. When she came back inside, Cole was checking the bound men's wounds. "This one needs stitches or he'll bleed out," he said, indicating the man Abigail had stabbed. "The other one will live." "Are you going to help them?" "Not yet." Cole stood, moved to the fireplace, and began rebuilding the fire that had gone out during the chaos. "First, I need to know if you're telling me everything." Abigail's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "They came here looking for money, for a dowry that doesn't exist." Cole's eyes were hard when he looked at her. "You want to tell me why they thought you had one?" "The original contract with Thornton included money. They must have assumed—" "Don't lie to me, not now." Cole's voice was quiet, but carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "I've let you keep your secrets because they didn't matter. But now men are dead and you nearly got yourself killed. So I'm asking you straight, what aren't you telling me?" Abigail's throat closed up. This was it, the moment where everything fell apart. She could lie again, maintain the fiction she'd built, or she could tell the truth and face whatever consequences came. "My name isn't Catherine," she said finally, the words coming out strangled. "Catherine was my sister. She was supposed to come here. But she ran away the night before and I took her place." Cole's expression didn't change. "Why?" "Because my mother was dying and we had no money, and the contract was the only thing keeping us from losing everything." The words spilled out faster now, months of lies breaking open. "I committed fraud. I stole my sister's identity and boarded that train knowing I'd never be able to make it right. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I lied to you. Sorry I brought this trouble. Sorry for all of it." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the rebuilding fire. "What's your real name?" Cole asked. "Abigail. Abigail Hawthorne." He considered this, then nodded once. "All right, Abigail, help me stitch up this bastard before he bleeds on my floor any more than he already has." That was it. No anger, no betrayal, no throwing her out into the snow, just acceptance and practicality. Abigail stared at him. "You're not upset?" "About what? That you lied?" Cole pulled out the medical kit. "I knew you weren't what you claimed to be within a day. The rest didn't matter then. Doesn't matter now." "But You survived," Cole interrupted. "You worked harder than anyone I've seen. You fought a bear and 3 armed men and didn't break. That's what matters." He threaded a needle with steady hands. "The name you use doesn't change what you've done." Something in Abigail's chest cracked open. Relief or grief or something she couldn't name. She moved to help him, her hands shaking less now. They worked on the wounded man in silence. Cole's stitches were neat, efficient. The man remained unconscious throughout, which was probably for the best. When it was done, Cole dragged both bound men to the corner and covered them with a blanket. Not gentle, but not cruel either. "They stay tied until morning," he said. "Then I'm taking them to the territorial marshal, 3 days' ride south." "What about him?" Abigail gestured to the dead man. "I'll bury him when the ground thaws. For now he goes in the shed where the cold will preserve him." The casual practicality of it made Abigail's skin crawl. But she helped anyway, because that's what you did out here. You handled what needed handling, no matter how ugly. They dragged the body outside and secured it in the shed. Then they returned to the cabin and began cleaning up the destruction. The cabin was a disaster. Furniture overturned, belongings scattered, floorboards pried up. It would take days to put everything right, but they were alive. Cole worked methodically, righting furniture, sweeping up broken glass. Abigail moved through the space in a daze, her hands doing the work while her mind tried to process everything that had happened. She'd killed someone, or helped kill them. The man she'd stabbed might have died if Cole hadn't come back in time. The weight of it sat heavy in her stomach. "You did what you had to," Cole said, as if reading her thoughts. "They came here to hurt you. You fought back. That's not murder. That's survival." "Feels like murder." "It does. First time always does." He paused, looking at her directly. "Gets easier. That's the part you should worry about." They finished cleaning as much as they could. The cabin was still in shambles, but at least it was functional. Cole barred the broken door as best he could, then added wood to the fire until it roared. The bound men hadn't woken yet. Wouldn't for hours, probably. Cole finally sat down at the table, exhaustion showing in the lines of his face. "I came back early. Storm was rolling in heavier than expected. Figured I'd rather hole up here than get caught in the high country." Lucky timing. Saw their tracks half a mile out. Knew something was wrong. His jaw tightened. Should have gotten here sooner. "You got here in time. That's what matters." Cole looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, still bloody, still shaking, and held it. "You did good, Abigail. Real good." It was the first time he'd used her real name, the first time he'd touched her beyond necessity. Abigail's throat burned. She gripped his hand back, holding on like it was the only solid thing in a world that had just proven how fragile everything could be. They sat like that while the fire burned and the wind howled and the bound men slept their fitful sleep. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the tracks, covering the evidence of violence. By morning, the world would look clean again. But Abigail knew better now. She understood what it took to survive out here, the choices you had to make, the lines you had to cross. And she understood that Cole Mercer, this scarred, dangerous man who'd become her unlikely partner, had just saved her life at considerable risk to his own. The debt between them had shifted, but it no longer felt like obligation. It felt like something else entirely. Neither of them slept that night. Cole kept watch by the fire, rifle across his knees, his eyes moving between the bound men and the broken door every few seconds. Abigail sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at nothing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the knife going into the man's leg, felt the resistance of flesh, heard his scream. "Stop replaying it," Cole said, without looking at her. "I'm not—" "You are. I can see it on your face." He added wood to the fire, the flames casting shadows that made the cabin feel smaller. "What's done is done. You can't change it by thinking about it. How do you just turn it off?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "You don't. You just learn to live with it. Keep moving forward, because stopping means it wins." "What wins? The fear, the guilt, all of it." He finally looked at her, his scarred face illuminated by firelight. "You did what you had to do to survive. That's not something to be ashamed of. Feels like it should be. That's how you know you're still human." One of the bound men groaned, shifting against his ropes. Cole was on his feet instantly, rifle raised, but the man didn't wake, just settled back into unconsciousness. Abigail watched Cole's careful movements, the way he never fully relaxed, always ready for the next threat. She wondered how many nights he'd spent like this, alone, vigilant, unable to trust anything beyond his own competence. "You said you'd take them to the marshal," she said. "When?" "Soon as there's light. Can't risk them waking up and causing trouble." He sat back down, keeping the rifle close. You'll stay here. Bar the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone until I get back. How long will you be gone? 4 days, maybe 5. Depends on the weather. He studied her face. You scared to be alone again? Abigail wanted to say no, wanted to be strong, unshakable, but she was tired of lying. Yes. Good. Fear keeps you careful. Cole leaned back in his chair. But you'll be fine. You proved that today. I got lucky. If you hadn't come back... But I did. His voice was firm. And you held them off long enough for it to matter. That's what counts. The acknowledgement settled over her like a blanket. Not praise exactly, but recognition. From Cole, it meant more than flowery compliments ever could. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the broken shutters. Cole roused the 2 surviving men with rough efficiency, checking their bindings, forcing water down their throats. The lead man, whose name turned out to be Silas Crow, glared at him with undisguised hatred. You're making a mistake, Silas said, his voice hoarse. We got friends. They'll come looking. Let them. Cole hauled him to his feet. Marshall will be interested to hear about a gang running robbery operations in the territory. Wasn't robbery, was debt collection. You broke into my home, threatened my... Cole stopped, the word hanging unfinished. Threatened her. That's not debt collection. That's assault. Silas's eyes slid to Abigail, calculating. She's not your wife, is she? That whole marriage contract was bullshit. I can see it now. You're just playing house with some runaway. Cole hit him, not with the rifle, just his fist, hard enough that Silas's head snapped back and blood poured from his nose. Talk about her again, and I'll leave you for the wolves, Cole said quietly. We clear? Silas spat blood but said nothing. Cole dragged both men outside, loading them onto their own horses with their hands bound to the saddle horns. He worked quickly, methodically, while Abigail watched from the doorway. When the horses were ready, Cole came back to the cabin. He pulled out a small leather pouch, different from the one Silas had stolen, and pressed it into Abigail's hands. Emergency money, he said. Hidden in the barn, false board in the back stall. If something happens and I don't come back, you take this and ride south. Don't stop until you hit civilization. Nothing's going to happen. Probably not. But you planned for the worst anyway. His eyes were serious. Promise me. If I'm not back in 7 days, you leave. Cole, promise me. Abigail's throat tightened. I promise. He nodded, satisfied. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. You're stronger than you think, he said quietly. Remember that. Then he was gone, leading the horses and their prisoners down the mountain, disappearing into the gray morning. Abigail stood in the doorway until she couldn't see them anymore. Then she barred the door and sank onto the floor, finally allowing herself to fall apart. She cried for the first time since arriving in the mountains. Not delicate tears, but harsh, body-shaking sobs that tore through her chest. All the fear and exhaustion and violence of the past day came pouring out in waves she couldn't control. When it finally subsided, she felt hollow, empty, but also lighter somehow, like the crying had drained some poison from her system. She washed her face in cold water, changed into clean clothes, and set about repairing the cabin. Work had always been her answer to chaos. It was the only thing that made sense. The door took most of the morning to fix properly. The hinges needed reinforcing, the bar had to be replaced entirely. Abigail worked with tools she was still learning to use, making mistakes, starting over, refusing to quit until it was done. By afternoon, the door was functional again. Not beautiful, but solid. It would hold. She moved on to the interior, righting furniture, organizing what the men had destroyed. She found the floorboard where they'd discovered Cole's savings and carefully replaced it, making a mental note of the hiding spot. The work kept her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. But as evening approached and the cabin grew dark, the isolation pressed in again. She built up the fire, made dinner she barely tasted, and tried to read from one of Cole's few books. The words wouldn't stick. Her mind kept drifting to the events of yesterday, to Cole's hands in hers, to the way he'd said her real name. She climbed to the loft but couldn't sleep. Every sound made her reach for the rifle. Every creak of the cabin settling made her heart race. This was going to be a long 4 days. The second day was worse, The silence became oppressive, broken only by the wind and the chicken's constant complaining. Abigail went through her chores like a ghost, mechanically feeding animals and chopping wood without really being present. She found herself talking out loud just to hear a human voice, even if it was only her own. Right, so the chickens need water. Obviously they need water. Everything needs water. Brilliant observation, Abigail. The rooster glared at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. By the third day, she'd developed a routine to combat the loneliness. Morning chores, then target practice with the rifle. Afternoon maintenance work on the cabin. Evening spent cooking something more complicated than necessary, just to fill the time. She was attempting bread, her third batch since Cole left, when she heard the horse. Single rider, moving slowly up the trail. Abigail's heart leaped. Cole was back early. She ran to the window, peering through the shutters. But the horse wasn't Cole's, and the rider was smaller, slighter. A woman. Abigail grabbed the rifle anyway, moving to the door but not opening it. "Who's there?" "Name's May." The voice was female, rough with age and weather. "I'm looking for Cole Mercer. He around?" "He's away. Won't be back for a few days."
Damn. I was hoping... The woman paused. "Listen, I don't mean any trouble. I run the trading post down in Pine Valley. Cole does business with me sometimes. I got some information he needs to hear." Abigail hesitated. This could be legitimate. Or it could be another trap. "What kind of information?"
"The kind that keeps him from getting ambushed when he comes back to town." May shifted in her saddle. "Look, I can tell you're alone and scared. Smart of you. But I'm 62 years old and I rode 3 days through snow to get here because I owe Cole a favor. So you can let me in for 10 minutes to deliver a message. Or I can leave and let him find out the hard way that Silas Crow's brother is planning something nasty."
The name Silas sent ice through Abigail's veins. She made a decision, probably a stupid one, and unbarred the door. May climbed down from her horse with the stiff movements of someone who'd been riding too long. She was exactly what she'd claimed to be, an older woman with gray hair, weathered skin, and eyes that had seen too much. She wore practical men's clothing and carried a rifle across her back. "You must be the Eastern bride everyone's talking about," May said, stomping snow from her boots. "Word travels fast." "Word travels slow out here. We just pay attention when it does." May stepped inside, looking around the cabin with an assessing eye. She noted the repaired door, the rifle in Abigail's hands, the general state of controlled chaos. "Heard there was trouble. Silas and his boys came through." "They did. Cole took them to the marshal. Figured as much when Silas didn't come back." May accepted the coffee Abigail offered, wrapping both hands around the cup. "But Silas has a brother. Name's Jack Crow. Meaner than Silas, if you can believe it. He's been down in Pine Valley asking questions, getting a gang together." "A gang for what?" "To come up here, get revenge, retrieve his brother, maybe both." May took a long drink. "I heard him talking in my store. Heard him say he was going to burn Cole Mercer out, make an example. Figured I should warn you." Abigail's stomach dropped. "When?" "Don't know exactly, but soon. They're gathering supplies, which means they're planning a trip. Could be days, could be weeks. Cole won't be back for at least 2 more days. Then you got a choice to make." May set down her cup. "You can run. Take one of those horses and head south. Get to safety before they arrive. Or you can stay and prepare." "I'm not running." "Didn't think you would. You got that look." May smiled, but it was sad. "Same look I had when I was your age. Stubborn beat, smart every time." "You said Cole owes you a favor?" "Other way around. I owe him." May stood, moving toward the door. 5 years back, my husband died. Left me with debts I couldn't pay. Cole bought up all my husband's I owe us from the creditors, then told me I could work off the debt by running the trading post for him. Never charged interest, never pushed. Just gave me a chance when no one else would. That doesn't sound like the Cole everyone describes. Most people don't know him. They see the scars and the isolation and assume he's some kind of monster. May pulled her coat tighter. But he's just a man who got tired of being disappointed. Easier to live alone than keep getting hurt. The words hit closer than Abigail wanted to admit. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the first person he's let close in all the years I've known him. And I don't want to see that end badly." May climbed onto her horse. "Take care of yourself, girl."
and tell Cole what I said when he gets back." She rode off before Abigail could respond, disappearing into the trees as quietly as she'd arrived. Abigail stood in the doorway, May's warning echoing in her head. Jack Crow was coming, with a gang, for revenge. She should run. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. But running meant abandoning everything she'd built here. It meant leaving Cole to face this alone. And she'd discovered something about herself over the past months, something fundamental. She was done running. Abigail spent the rest of the day preparing. She checked every weapon in the cabin, 2 rifles, 1 shotgun, a revolver Cole kept in a drawer. She loaded them all, placed them strategically around the cabin where she could grab them quickly. She reinforced the shutters with extra boards, moved furniture to create barriers, filled buckets with water in case they tried to burn her out. She was terrified. But she was also angry. These men thought they could just take what they wanted, hurt whoever they wanted, without consequences. They were wrong. Cole came back on the 4th day, just after noon. Abigail heard his horse and had the rifle raised before she remembered to check who it was. She threw open the door and something in her chest loosened at the sight of him, alive, whole, safe. Cole dismounted, taking in her defensive preparations with one sweeping glance. What happened? Abigail told him about May's visit, about Jack Crow, about the gang gathering in Pine Valley. Cole listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each word. "When did May leave?" he asked when she finished. 2 days ago. "Then Jack's probably less than a day behind me." Cole began unloading supplies from his horse with increased urgency. "I need to know, are you willing to fight, or do you want me to get you out of here?" "I'm staying." "Abigail, I'm staying," she repeated more firmly. "They came after us once. They'll do it again. Running just delays it." Cole studied her face, looking for doubt. He didn't find any. "All right," he said finally, "then we prepare for war." They worked through the afternoon with focused intensity. Cole showed her how to create kill zones, places where attackers would be exposed and vulnerable. They set up additional barriers, created escape routes, planned for every contingency. "If they come, it'll be at night," Cole said as they worked. "They'll want the darkness. We use that against them." "How?" "Fire, noise, confusion." He positioned a lantern near the door. "We make them think there are more of us than there are. Make them hesitate." "Will it work?" "Maybe. Maybe not." Cole met her eyes. "But we make them pay for every inch. Make them regret coming here." As evening fell, Cole pulled out his satchel. Inside was the marriage contract, the document that had bound Abigail to Augustus Thornton, then transferred her to Cole like property. He held it for a moment, staring at the official stamps and signatures. "What are you doing?" Abigail asked. Instead of answering, Cole walked to the fireplace and threw the contract directly into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, turned to ash. "You're free," he said, watching it burn. "No contract, no obligation, no debt." Abigail's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you're not property. You never were." Cole turned to face her. "After tonight, if we survive, you can leave. I'll give you money for passage back east, help you start over wherever you want. And if I don't want to leave, then you stay. But as a choice, not a requirement." His voice was rough. "Everything from here on out is your choice." The weight of what he'd just done settled over Abigail like snow. He'd freed her, completely. No strings, no conditions. She'd spent months in this cabin, fighting to survive, learning to be strong. She'd discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. Courage, resilience, stubbornness that bordered on madness. And somewhere along the way, this scarred, difficult man had become the only person who truly saw her. Not Catherine, not a fraud. Just Abigail. "Cole," she started, but he shook his head. "But don't. Not before we know if we're going to survive the night." He checked the rifles one more time. "Save it for after." "What if there isn't an after? Then it won't matter anyway." They prepared through the evening, tension building with each passing hour. Cole extinguished most of the lights, keeping just enough fire to see by. They positioned themselves by different windows, watching the tree line. Abigail's hands shook as she gripped the rifle. Not from fear exactly, though she was terrified. From adrenaline. From the knowledge that everything was about to change. "You did good," Cole said quietly from across the room. these past months. Everything you learned, everything you survived. I'm proud of you." It was the most open emotion she'd ever heard from him. Abigail's throat went tight. "I wouldn't have made it without you," she said. "Yes, you would have. You're tougher than you think." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out alone." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. Something that might have been the beginning of trust, or maybe something deeper. "Whatever happens tonight," he started. A branch snapped outside. Cole went silent immediately, every muscle tensing. Abigail raised her rifle, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. They waited. Another sound. Closer. Multiple footsteps, trying to be quiet. "They're here," Cole whispered. Through the shutters, Abigail caught glimpses of movement, dark shapes circling the cabin. At least 4, maybe more. A voice called out from the darkness. "Cole Mercer! We know you're in there." Jack Crow. Had to be. The voice was similar to Silas's, but harder, colder. "Send out my brother and the other man, and we'll leave you alone." Cole didn't respond, just kept his rifle trained on the door. "I know you can hear me. You got 1 minute to decide, then we burn you out." Abigail's pulse hammered in her ears. This was it. The moment everything either held together or fell apart. Cole looked at her across the darkened cabin. "You ready?" Abigail thought about everything that had brought her here. The lies, the desperation, the slow transformation from a frightened woman in a veil to someone who could stand and fight. She thought about the marriage contract burning to ash, about freedom, about choice. "Ready," she said. Cole nodded. Then he raised his rifle and fired through the shutter, shattering the silence. The night exploded into chaos. Gunfire answered gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning. Men shouted, cursed, scattered for cover as Cole's first shot found its mark, and someone screamed. Abigail fired through her shutter at a shape moving near the woodpile. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. She didn't know if she hit anything, but the shape dove behind cover. "Reload!" Cole barked. "Keep them back!" She fumbled with the rifle, hands shaking, trying to remember everything he'd taught her. Bullet in, slide the bolt, aim, fire. Another shot. This one went wide, splintering wood somewhere in the darkness. "They're circling!" Cole moved to the back window, fired twice in quick succession. "Watch the door!" Something heavy hit the side of the cabin. Then another impact. They were throwing things, rocks, branches, trying to find weak points. A bottle shattered against the wall, liquid splashing. The smell of kerosene filled the air. "They're trying to burn us out," Abigail's voice cracked. "Not if we keep them scared." Cole grabbed the lantern by the door, opened the shutter just enough to hurl it outside. It arced through the darkness and smashed near where she'd seen men gathering. Fire spread across the ground where the kerosene had pooled earlier. Not enough to do real damage, but enough to illuminate several figures scrambling backward. Abigail fired at the closest one. He went down, whether hit or just diving for cover, she couldn't tell. "There's too many," she said. "Cole, there's I know." He was already reloading, his movements precise despite the chaos. "But they didn't expect resistance. They thought you'd be alone, thought I'd roll over. We make them bleed enough, they'll reconsider." A voice shouted from the darkness. "This is your last chance, Mercer. Send out my brother or we kill you both." "Your brother's with the marshal," Cole shouted back. 3 days south. You want him? Go get him yourself." "Liar, you killed him. I know you did." "He's alive for now. Depends on what you do next." Silence. Then whispered arguing from multiple positions around the cabin. They were regrouping, deciding. Cole used the pause to move back to Abigail's position. His face was streaked with soot and sweat, but his hands were steady. "We can't hold them all night," he said quietly. "They'll wear us down eventually." "So what do? "We change the game." He pulled out the revolver, checked the cylinder. "I'm going out there." "That's insane. It's tactical. They expect us to stay defensive. I hit them from outside, make them think we got reinforcements. They'll panic." His eyes met hers. "But you need to keep firing from here. Make noise, make them think you're not alone." "Cole, they'll kill you." "Maybe, but if we both stay in here, they'll definitely kill us both." He gripped her shoulder, his touch firm. "You can do this." "I know you can." Before she could argue, he moved to the back window, kicked it open, and dropped through. Abigail's heart seized. She rushed to the front, fired blindly toward where she'd last seen movement, then sprinted to the side window and fired again, making noise, creating confusion. Outside, she heard Cole's rifle crack twice. A man screamed. Footsteps crashed through underbrush. "Behind you!" someone shouted. "He's behind!" Another gunshot cut him off. Abigail kept firing, moving from window to window, making it seem like there were multiple defenders. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Her ears rang. But she didn't stop. A face appeared at the front window, one of Jack's men trying to peer inside. Abigail didn't think, just raised the shotgun and fired. The man disappeared in a spray of buckshot and broken shutter. Her stomach turned, but she forced herself to reload. No time for horror. No time for anything but survival. More shouting outside, running footsteps. The sharp crack of Cole's rifle from a different position now. He was moving, flanking them, making them afraid to stand still. Then a different sound. Horses. Multiple horses, approaching fast from down the trail. Abigail's blood went cold. Reinforcements. Jack had brought more men than they'd thought, but the voice that called out wasn't Jack's. "Territorial Marshal, drop your weapons." Everything stopped. Through the broken shutter, Abigail saw torches approaching, at least 6 riders, moving into the clearing with authority. The lead rider wore a badge that caught the firelight. "I said drop them," the marshal's voice boomed. "Now!" Confused shouting from Jack's men. Some started backing away. Others raised their hands. "My brother's being held illegally," Jack Crow's voice, desperate now. "Mercer kidnapped him." "Mercer delivered 3 men to my custody 2 days ago," the marshal said coldly, "on charges of armed robbery and assault. I have their confessions. I also have a very interesting story about you gathering a gang to exact revenge. That's not—" "Shut up." The marshal gestured to his deputies. "Round them up. Anyone runs, shoot them." It happened quickly after that. Jack's gang, already rattled by Cole's attack and now facing legal authority, surrendered without much fight. The deputies moved through the clearing, disarming men and binding hands. Cole emerged from the tree line, rifle still raised, watching everything with suspicious eyes. The marshal rode up to him. "Mercer, you all right?" "Fine. How'd you know to come?" "May sent word, said there might be trouble brewing." The marshal looked toward the cabin. "That the woman who fought off Silas and his boys?" Cole nodded toward Abigail, who was climbing through the front door, shotgun still in her hands, looking half wild in the firelight. The marshal touched his hat. "Ma'am, heard you gave better than you got. That's commendable." Abigail's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the shotgun. "I did what I had to. Most people fold when it comes to that. You didn't." He turned back to Cole. "I'll need statements from both of you, but that can wait until morning. We'll camp here tonight, move these idiots back to town at first light." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. "Appreciated, Marshal." "Don't thank me. Thank May." "Woman rode through a snowstorm to tell me what was happening." The marshal guided his horse toward where his deputies were securing prisoners. "Get some rest. You both earned it." The next hours passed in a blur. The deputies established a perimeter, guarded the prisoners. Someone made coffee. Cole and Abigail gave brief statements about both attacks. Silas's crew and tonight's assault. The marshal listened, took notes, asked few questions. When they finished, he looked at Abigail with something like respect. "You're either very brave or very stupid, staying up here after everything that happened." "Little of both, probably," Abigail admitted. "Well, it worked out. Jack Crow and his boys will hang for this. They got priors, got a reputation. Judge won't show mercy." He closed his notebook. "You two should be safe now. Word'll spread about what happened here. Most folks'll think twice before coming after Cole Mercer again." After the marshal left to check on his men, Abigail and Cole stood in the clearing, surrounded by chaos and strangers, yet somehow more alone than they'd been all night. "You should go inside," Cole said quietly. "Get warm." "You're not coming?" "Need to help them secure the area. Won't be long." But Abigail saw the truth in his eyes. He needed space, needed to process what had almost happened, how close they'd come to dying. She went inside, leaving him to his thoughts. The cabin was a disaster again. Broken shutters, bullet holes, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Abigail moved through it mechanically, righting overturned furniture, sweeping up debris. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd killed someone tonight, or helped kill them. The man at the window, the one she'd hit with the shotgun. She didn't know if he was dead, but he probably was. The weight of it sat in her chest like a stone. She was still cleaning when Cole finally came back inside, hours later. The deputies had settled for the night. The prisoners were secured, and the cabin was as quiet as it had been in days. Cole looked exhausted. He moved like every muscle ached, like he was holding himself together through sheer will. "You should sleep," Abigail said. "So should you." "Can't." Cole nodded, understanding. He sat at the table, and after a moment, Abigail joined him. They sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging between them. The attacks, the violence, the contract burning to ash, the unspoken things that had been building for months. "I killed someone tonight," Abigail said finally. "The man at the window." "I know. Does it get easier, like you said?" Cole was quiet for a long time. "No, it gets different. You learn to carry it, but it doesn't get easier." "Good." Abigail's voice was fierce. "I don't want it to be easy. I don't want to be the kind of person who kills and doesn't feel it." "You won't be." Cole looked at her directly. "You're too stubborn to let this place turn you cold." "You're not cold." "No?" He almost smiled. "Most people would disagree. Most people are wrong." Abigail reached across the table, took his hand. His fingers were calloused, scarred, warm. "You saved my life tonight, multiple times. You could have left me to handle it alone, but you didn't." "Couldn't do that." "Why not?" Cole's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't know how to say. "Because somewhere between you showing up terrified in a veil and you fighting 3 armed men with a kitchen knife, you became—" He stopped, started over. "You're not an obligation anymore. Haven't been for a long time." "Then what am I?" He looked at her with those pale gray eyes that had seemed so cold when she first arrived. They weren't cold now. They were uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "You're the first person in 10 years who made me think maybe I don't have to be alone," he said roughly, "and that scares the hell out of me." Abigail's breath caught. "Cole, I burned that contract because you deserve a choice, because you should be free to leave if that's what you want." His grip on her hand tightened. "But I'm asking you to stay. Not because of debt or obligation or anything except, I want you here. I want you to stay." Everything Abigail had been holding back came flooding to the surface. The fear, the loneliness, the slow realization that this brutal mountain and this difficult man had become home in a way St. Louis never had. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not for St. Louis, not for civilization, not for anything. I'm staying because I want to. Because you're right, I'm not the same person who got off that train. That woman was running from everything. This version of me wants to run toward something." "Toward what?" "Toward you, you stubborn ass." Abigail stood, moved around the table until she was standing in front of him. "Toward this life we've built. Toward whatever comes next." Cole stood too, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd been broken by different things, who'd found each other through fraud and coincidence and desperation, who'd learned to survive together. Then Cole kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with the fierce certainty of someone who'd stopped fighting what they wanted. Abigail kissed him back, pouring months of tension and fear and unexpected affection into it. His hands came up to cup her face, surprisingly tender despite their roughness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not easy to live with," he said. "I know. I'm difficult, stubborn, got a temper. I noticed. And I don't know how to be gentle or romantic or any of the things you probably deserve." Abigail laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Cole, I stabbed a man in the leg and shot another one with a shotgun. Do I seem like someone who needs gentle?" Despite everything, he smiled. Really smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face into something almost beautiful. "No," he admitted, "you really don't." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the ruined cabin, surrounded by evidence of violence, but also of survival. Outside, dawn was starting to break. Gray light filtered through the broken shutters, illuminating the damage but also the resilience. They'd defended this place. Together. They'd won. "We should probably sleep," Abigail said eventually. "Probably." Neither of them moved. "Or we could start fixing the shutters," Cole suggested. "At dawn? After the night we just had?" "Work helps. You taught me that." Abigail pulled back to look at him. "I taught you? You think I didn't notice? Every time things got hard, you worked through it. Chopping wood, fixing the roof, learning to shoot. You never quit." His expression softened. "That's not something I taught you. That's who you are." The words settled over her like a blessing she hadn't known she needed. They fixed the shutters as the sun rose, working side by side in comfortable silence. The deputies woke, began preparing to move out with their prisoners. The marshal stopped by to confirm their statements, promised to send word when the trial concluded. Jack Crow, bound and defeated, glared at them from his horse. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Cole said flatly. "You're going to hang. Your brother's probably going to hang with you, and word's going to spread about what happens when people come after what's mine." Jack's eyes cut to Abigail. "She's not worth dying for." "Good thing that's not your decision to make." Cole turned his back, dismissing him entirely. The marshal and his prisoners rode out mid-morning, leaving Cole and Abigail alone again. But this time, the isolation didn't feel oppressive. It felt like peace. They spent the following days repairing the damage. New shutters, patched walls, replaced furniture. The work was hard but satisfying, each repair a small act of reclamation. 1 week after the attack, May showed up again, this time with supplies and news. "Trial happened fast," she said over coffee. "Judge didn't waste time. Jack Crow and 2 of his men are set to hang next month. The others got prison sentences." "What about Silas?" Abigail asked. 15 years hard labor. He talked, gave up information about other gangs operating in the territory, bought himself some leniency. May looked between them. "You two are famous now, by the way. Stories spreading. Eastern Bride and the Mountain Man who fought off a gang. People are talking." Cole grimaced. "Great, just what I wanted. Attention." "Could be good for business," May pointed out. "People know you're not someone to mess with. Might bring more legitimate trade to the area. Or more trouble. Maybe. But you handled this trouble pretty well." May stood to leave. "I should get back. Just wanted to make sure you were both all right." Abigail walked her out. Before May mounted her horse, she turned back. "You planning to stay?" May asked quietly. "Yes. Even though you could leave now? Contract's void, you're free to go anywhere?" "This is where I want to be." May studied her face, then nodded. "Good. Cole needs someone who'll stand with him. Not many people can handle this life, but I think you can." "I'm learning." "We all are." May climbed into her saddle. "Take care of each other. That's all any of us can do out here." She rode off, leaving Abigail standing in the clearing that had been a battlefield just days ago. The snow was already covering the evidence, smoothing everything over, making it look peaceful again. That was the thing about the wilderness. It was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. It didn't care about your past, your mistakes, your lies. It only cared about whether you could survive it. And Abigail had learned she could. Winter deepened over the following months. The snow came in waves, sometimes burying the cabin to the windows just like Cole had warned. But they were prepared. The root cellar was full, the wood was stacked high, and they'd learned to work together with an efficiency born of trust. The isolation that had once terrified Abigail became something she valued. No judgment, no expectations, no need to pretend to be anyone other than who she was. She wrote to her mother once, a letter that took 3 weeks to compose. She didn't mention the attacks or the violence or how close she'd come to dying, just that she was safe, healthy, and had found a life worth living. She included money, some of what Cole had given her, some she'd earned helping him with trapping and trading. She never mentioned Catherine. Let her mother believe the lie. It was kinder that way. Cole taught her to track animals through the snow, to read the mountain's moods, to survive in conditions that would kill most people. She taught him that silence didn't always mean strength, that talking about hard things didn't make you weak. They were both still learning, still making mistakes, still stubborn and difficult in their own ways. But they were learning together. On the first day of spring, when the snow finally began to melt and the passes reopened, Cole asked her a question. They were standing outside the cabin, watching water run down from the mountains in silver streams, the world coming back to life after months of ice. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Getting on that train, coming here instead of your sister?" Abigail thought about the terrified woman in the veil, so desperate to save her family that she'd committed fraud. She thought about everything that had happened since, the fear, the violence, the slow transformation into someone stronger. "No," she said honestly. Catherine would have hated it here. She wanted safety, comfort, predictability. "I thought I wanted that too, but I was wrong." "What do you want?" "This." Abigail gestured to the mountains, the cabin, him. "A life that's honest, even when it's hard. A place where I matter because of what I do, not who I'm supposed to be." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band, worn and old. "This was my mother's," he said. "Only thing I kept from before the war, before everything went to hell." He held it out to her, his hand steady despite the weight of the gesture. "I know we don't need a ceremony, contract's already burned, and I don't much care what society thinks. But I'm asking anyway. You want to be my wife? Actual wife, not because of debt or fraud, but because we choose it." Abigail's throat went tight. She looked at the ring, at Cole's scarred face, at the cabin they defended together. She thought about choices, real choices, not ones forced by desperation or circumstance. She chose this. "Yes," she said. Cole slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They married themselves that evening by the fire. No witnesses, except the mountains and the wind. It wasn't legal, wasn't official, didn't matter to anyone but them. But it was real. More real than any contract, any lie, any desperate bargain. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing about life in the mountains was easy. But they were good years. Honest years. Years filled with hard work and harder weather, with small victories and occasional setbacks. Abigail never became soft again. The calluses on her hands never faded. She learned to hunt, to track, to survive alone when Cole's work took him away for weeks at a time. She became known in the territory, not as the Eastern Bride, but as Abigail Mercer. The woman who'd fought off a gang. The woman who could outshoot most men and outstubborn the rest. People told stories about her. Some were true, some weren't. She didn't care much either way. Cole softened in small ways. Never fully. The scars went too deep for that. But he laughed more, talked more, let himself be vulnerable with her in ways he'd never allowed himself before. They built a real life together. Not the life Abigail had imagined in St. Louis, watching her sister prepare for a loveless marriage. Something better. Something earned through sweat and blood and refusing to give up. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howled and the fire burned low, Abigail thought about the woman she used to be. The one who'd boarded that train in a veil, drowning in lies and desperation. She didn't miss her. That woman had been scared of everything. Hardship, judgment, failure, herself. This version of Abigail was scared of nothing. Or maybe she was scared of everything, but she'd learned that fear wasn't a reason to quit. The mountains had taught her that. Cole had taught her that. But mostly, she'd taught herself. And that was the truth she carried with her through everything that followed. Not that she'd survived despite her fear, but that she'd survived because she'd faced it. Because she'd stopped running and started fighting. Because she'd learned that sometimes the biggest lies we tell are the ones we tell ourselves about who we're capable of being. Abigail had thought she was weak, useless, nothing like her beautiful sister. She'd been wrong about all of it. Years later, standing on the porch of the cabin she'd helped build, watching the sun set over the Wind River Mountains with Cole's hand in hers, Abigail finally understood something fundamental. She hadn't stolen her sister's life. She'd found her own. And it was better than anything she could have imagined. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and snow and possibility. Somewhere in the valley below, wolves howled. Above, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than anyone in St. Louis would ever see. Cole squeezed her hand. "Getting cold. We should go in." "In a minute." "Stubborn woman. You married me anyway. Best decision I ever made." They stood there together as night fell, two people who'd been broken by different things,
who'd found each other through impossible circumstances, who'd built something real from lies and desperation and sheer determination. The story that spread through the Wyoming territory in the years that followed was never quite accurate. People got the details wrong, embellished the violence, romanticized the hardship. But they got one thing right. They said Abigail Mercer was the toughest woman in the mountains, that she'd survived things that would break most people, that she and her husband were legendary, untouchable, unbeatable, carved from the same stone as the peaks they called home. And for once, the legend was true. Not because Abigail was perfect or fearless or any of the things stories claimed, but because she'd learned the most important lesson the frontier had to teach. Survival wasn't about being strong enough that nothing could hurt you. It was about getting hurt and choosing to stand up anyway. Again and again and again. Until the mountain respected you for it. Until you respected yourself. And that, Abigail thought, as she finally let Cole pull her inside where the fire was warm and the coffee was hot, was worth more than any life she could have lived in comfortable lies. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold. Inside, they were home.